Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just gave some of the lingering questions around the top 10 teams in the country. Definitely some big time ones that could really impact these teams even in week one, and we'll figure that out pretty soon here. But let's get into Texas and let's talk about those one score games that they had a year ago because they could really come back to bite them this year. And some of those games should not have been one score games. So let's go ahead and jump into this and let's talk about it here for a second because Texas is a team that's heading into this year with as much hype as pretty much anyone in the country. They last year they went to the playoff, won 12 games for the first time since 2009, walking into the SEC as the second favorite team to win it. So much hype is going into this season for Steve Sarkisian and the Texas Longhorns. The question is, have they taken that step forward again from the one-score games that they need to? Because you look at the history under Steve Sarkisian in these games, it's not necessarily the prettiest thing in the world. Year one, it was 2-5. They lost all but two of those games that year by one score. In year two, it was 2-5 again in those games, and they lost every game that they lost that year by one score. Last year it was 3-2, and again they lost every game by one score. So every game but two games during Steve Sarkisian's career that has been lost at Texas has been by one score, and frankly, is that a good thing or a bad thing is a very hard thing to figure out. Is that a reason for confidence because they're playing teams really close, a couple of plays here and there could make the difference, or are you not being able to close out games that you should be closing out? So let's get into the games that happened last year where they were a little bit better in that front, and let's kind of break this down here for a second. It started with Oklahoma, so it was quite a bit into the season before they had their first game. I believe this was game 6 of the season, so that Alabama game was won by 10, so this is the first one-score game that they had, and frankly, this one's relatively simple. What went wrong? Red zone efficiency was a big-time problem. They got stopped on the goal line. Quinn Ewers threw a pick at the 2-yard line. A number of problems in the red area that they needed to fix, and frankly, that's going to be another thing to watch for this team, and will likely impact this question a lot. Can they be better in the red zone? If they can, then likely a lot of these one-score games wouldn't have happened a year ago, and they'd be on, rolling into this year. So this is one you just got to finish those drives. You got to make sure that you can get in the end zone, and if you don't, then stuff like that's going to happen. Nick Anderson's going to make a catch with about 15 seconds left in the game and bury you. So definitely something to watch, and that one's a little bit more simple than the rest of them. Houston was another one. This was the one that Quinn Ewers went down in. So he went down somewhere in the third quarter. I think he got hurt a little bit earlier in the game. They tried to keep it going and couldn't, so Malik Murphy took over and led them to a win. And it was really close. They were up 21-0 in this game. Houston came all the way back. They barely won this game. And frankly, if you're watching, there was a spot that was questionable, and I'll leave it at that for the time being. But at the end of the day, Texas did get out with a win, and you can chalk this up to Quinn Ewers getting hurt. You can chalk this up to a number of things, but in reality, Steve Sarkisian took his foot off the gas pedal. They were up 21-0. They were absolutely rolling through this defense, and then he started running the ball way too much. He started, just trying to run clock and keep their lead, and while there is a time and place to do that, no doubt about that, you got to make sure you're in a rhythm. And that's kind of the big time moniker throughout this entire thing is keeping your foot on the gas pedal is a problem for Texas. And if they can fix that problem this upcoming year, this can be one of the best, if not the best offense in the country. But if they're going to continue taking their foot off the gas pedal, then some of these teams are going to beat them, plain and simple. Over to Kansas State. This was the game, I believe, right after that Houston game, and it was Malik Murphy starting. So this one was a little bit different as well, but again, they were up by quite a bit in this game and let Kansas State back into it for the same exact reason that it happened at Houston. There is a thing about this team where they roll out in the first 15 plays. That scripted drive is absolutely beautiful because Steve Sarkisian's one of the best in the business at pulling that off, but right after that, you got to make sure you keep that rhythm. You got to make sure you keep the ball in Quinn Ewers' hands, or in this scenario, in Malik Murphy's hands, and allow this team to do what they do. So that's the big-time question. They escaped in overtime because of the defense making some big-time plays down the stretch, but definitely it was a big-time question mark and one that could have totally changed their season last year. TCU was a very weird one. That was one where Quinn Ewers threw a pick early in the game. Jordan Whittington went back and got a fumble for them. It was absolutely ridiculous. But at the end of the day, they were up 26-6 in this game. They ended up winning 29-26. So that can't happen. It was the exact same thing as the last two games we talked about now. They won all of these games. So hard for me to really, really get mad at them. But at the end of the day, these shouldn't have been one-score games. These should have been games they won by 14 or 21, kept rolling on with their season, and didn't have to worry about them. They ended up having to worry about them. That's definitely something to watch. And then the Washington game is probably the most straightforward, if I'm being totally honest, and it was really just Michael Penix was on another planet. They did make their mistakes, no doubt about it, but Michael Penix did not miss a spot that entire game, and frankly, you would be hard-pressed to find a defense that was going to stop him that day. So this is one, it came down to the wire. You definitely had some missed opportunities, but overall, there were very few teams that were beating Michael Penix in Washington that day. So that one's a little bit less of a worry than the rest of them, but overall, it comes back to one thing. You have to be able to say, we're up 21-0, we're moving the ball, and yes, you don't want to, push the ball down the field and be super aggressive and throw picks and get yourself into precarious situations, but you also don't want to lose that rhythm. You also don't want to just sit down and say, well, let's just run the ball the next couple of drives, run some time off the clock, because then some teams get some momentum. They get some energy on that sideline, and that's the last thing you want to give an SEC team as they head into this year. So overall, for me, it's keep the ball in Quinn Ewers' hands this year. You already have a running back problem, which is definitely something to watch throughout this year. I don't think it's quite as big of a problem as some people are making it out to be, but that's another conversation. I think at the end of the day, this is a third-year starter. This is a guy that came back for a reason. This is a guy that understands your offense as well as anyone in that building but Steve Sarkisian. Keep the ball in his hands. Say that, we know that you're going to make all of the right decisions, and if you make a bad one, the defense will pick you up. So I think it's one of those things that obviously when you're up 21 points, you're going to change the way you go about business. You're going to, run the ball a little bit more. You're going to run the clock a little bit more. But you shouldn't lose the rhythm of the offense. You shouldn't lose the play calling rhythm where you're just running the ball, 4 times in a row, going 3 and out and moving on to the next drive. You should, sprinkle in some different things. Use a lot of the RPOs. Use a lot of the screen passes that Steve Sarkisian loves so much, and have that rhythm in the offense while still being up 21, because then you can get up 28 and you can get up 35, and that's the big time thing here where you're walking into a conference that is not going to give you any inches. If you let them back in the game, they're going to stomp on your neck and win it. I promise you that. You're not going to walk into Fayetteville and let them come back from 20 points down and them not win the game. You're not going to walk into Kyle Field, allow them to get some momentum, and them not win the game. I can promise you that. Now, you could probably do it at TCU. You could probably do it at some of these other places, but once you get into those big-time environments, once those fans get involved, you're going to have a big-time problem on your hands. So that's the reality of this season. It comes down to Steve Sarkisian and him saying, I understand we're up 21 right now, but we're not going to stop throwing the ball. And you don't have to be very aggressive. You don't have to push the ball downfield like a madman, but you do have to keep the rhythm. You do have to keep the ball in Quinn Ewers' hands, your best player's hands, and make sure that this continues to roll. So that's the reality. The best offenses in the country and the best offenses throughout the last 10 years, they're not about, always being passing, always pushing the ball downfield, always doing that, but they also don't stop. The car doesn't change speeds, it shifts gears, and it continues to fly. That's the goal of this offense, is to not take your foot off the gas pedal, to make sure that you continue moving, you just shift gears a little bit, and you continue with that rhythm that you have in this offense. So there's a number of different things that are going to come into play this year in the SEC, and those atmospheres are going to be a huge part of that. So if Texas is up 21-0 on Texas A&M, let's say, I don't necessarily think that's going to happen, but let's just say that that's the case, and then in 2 drives later, Texas A&M is down by 7. That crowd is fully back into the game, and that is not something that Texas wants to deal with. So overall, Steve Sarkisian just got to be more aggressive. He's got to be the guy that goes out there and says, I trust my quarterback, I trust my players to make all of the plays that I need him to make, even when we're up 14, even when we're up 21, and even when there is an ability for that team to come back, you got to make sure you keep your foot on their neck. So overall, this is the big thing for Texas. They have the ability to win all of these games. There's not a team in the country that Texas can't get on the field with and beat on any given Saturday. The thing is, can they beat them when they are up a little bit and let them back in? Do they have the ability to close out those big-time games? Because the 2 best teams that I just talked about in this segment were Oklahoma and Washington. They weren't able to win those games. So you have to make sure that in those big-time games, against those big-time teams, when it gets a little tight late in the game, you have the closing skills to win those games. And it's really a Steve Sarkisian thing more than anything else. It's about, keeping that foot on the gas pedal. They talk about all gas, no brakes over at Texas. That hasn't been the case over the last couple of years when it comes to play calling. They got to fix that this year. And if they don't, then there's going to be a number of SEC teams that are able to take advantage of this and give some wins or give some losses to Texas where they got wins a year ago. So this will definitely be something to watch. If they can limit one-score games even more, that's obviously what you want. Go down from 5 to 3 this upcoming year. That would be a big-time thing. But overall, it could be a huge problem. That could be the difference in Texas season this upcoming year. But let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about fall camp. There is so much stuff going on, and a number of quarterbacks have just been named the starter on their team. So we'll get into that right after this, so stick with us.